IFAD.
Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We're a little bit late, actually, half an hour late, so we're trying to shorten this presentation. I've been introduced. It's my pleasure to be here. It's an honor. All of you here, particularly under the circumstances, so we're very delighted of have you here. If my presentation could go live. Today we're going to be showcasing some background information basically on the region. It's remit scope, if I could have the presentation up. Well, in the meantime, I just want to highlight one thing. 5 years ago, in 2013, IFAD and the World Bank organized actually the last forum in Asia to highlight the importance of these flows, of remittances, the potential for investment and for productive use. We learned many things 5 years ago with the World Bank, but one thing that really came out that shows it was essential was data. Having the right data to bring the importance to the table was crucial. More than that, the analysis of this data was particularly important. We needed to understand what we were looking, we needed to digest that and bring it forward. And last but not least, get that information to the right people. It's very nice to have all the data that we want, but if the right people that can make something out of it don't have it, it is a problem. So we came a long way in trying to do that and in trying to stimulate impact. And this is why we provide, as a response from IFAD, at least from our side, the publication and the portal Remit Scope, as you can see in the screens, if we can, whoops. Remit Scope, which will be introduced in two parts. I'm just doing really an introduction, but I'm going to leave the floor later on for to my colleague Leon to showcase some more of the findings. As basically a very simple objective of bringing together the goals of remittance families and strategies of the private sector to underserved markets. That's the overall objective of this publication. It covers, of course, regional, sub-regional, and country-level data and market analysis. So we want to get from a bird's eye perspective to the more in-country and hopefully in the future more beyond country level, but regional or community-level information. The key areas: remittances and migration, of course, markets, regulatory environment, and of particular interest to us, inclusive financial services. Something that can address the importance that, as I say, I will say in a brief moment, for remittances families. So it is a web portal, it is live today. You will find the profiles, all the countries in Asia are covered, as well as regions and sub-regions, analysis. We will ask, of course, stakeholders to participate in this effort in order to make this a tool that is also useful and of particular use, I would say, for the private sector, but also for regulators. So trying to sum up this tool or this web portal, I can only think of one word, of opportunity. Opportunity, of course, for the private sector in terms of identifying market gaps that exist, comparing prices, for instance, but also an opportunity for regulators. There is an arcade of best practices that exist out there. We're hosted today by many of those best practices, as Bank Negara will demonstrate during this forum and share with us. But I think this is type of information that should be shared also and inspire other areas of the region. We will address Asia. We will talk more about the markets. I would like to provide you the snapshot of what the flows to the region have been in 2018, $265.56 billion in remittances. That corresponds to 53% of the global flows by those 5 regions in the continent. 30 countries receive more than 100 million. 17 countries have remittances corresponding to 3% of the GDP. This is very important, this is very impressive, and of course remit scopes cover that. But the real challenge is to showcase the opportunity of $200. $200 for the private sector, how to get the money there, cheap, safe, and how to leverage its potential. Any finance person will understand when you're trying to leverage this is how can we make more than $200 out of $200, and that's the whole point. For regulators is to facilitate, because this is multiplied by 2 million transactions, and that's really the challenge at us. For IFAD, our particular interest, including in remit scope, is how can we promote financial inclusion $200 at a time, one family at a time. And we have included some of the best practices and policies towards financial inclusion in remit scope, and again, we hope that everybody will be able to contribute. So without further ado and taking any more time, I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Leon Isaac, expert in this field for a long time and contributor of the report. Leon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Yes, good morning. It's still morning. I have to start with an apology. I was always told never start your presentation with an apology. I apologise to all of those of you who thought this was going to be before the coffee break and left early to get a coffee. You don't escape me that easily. So, having said that, it's actually been a pleasure to work on this project and to launch the portal, which actually, if you come to some of the stands after the event, you'll be able to get demonstrations to see its full potential, because it's quite difficult to show it here. So what I'm going to do in a very short period of time is try and give you a sort of flavour for some of the key themes that have come out from investigating this region, and to give you something that you can start understanding the potential here. I think most of you know it already, but to give you a different angle. I think one of the key things, as Pedro already mentioned and some of the other speakers, is that Asia-Pacific is a massive region, is the biggest received region in the world, and it's also, due to its breadth and diversity, has some of the examples of best practices in pretty much every area, whether it's financial inclusion, pricing, government initiatives, fintech, and so on, which is great. The key challenge for us, I think, is how do we put them all together to create the right recipe for really delivering the optimum remittances market for the remitters and their families. And so what we're going to do is just now cover some of the high-level thoughts. So the first thing is, I think you all know, roughly, well you should know, Asia and the Pacific is 50 countries. It is a massive region in itself. And I think that's one of the challenges. We talk about a region, but actually, as Pedro's slide said, we've broken it down into 5 sub-regions. And I think that's the key thing with remittances always. We talk about a massive market with massive numbers. We know it's millions and millions of individual transactions. It's the world's largest receive region. 7 of the 10 largest receiving countries in the world are based in this region, including the top 3, as you know, India, China and the Philippines. Equally importantly, 4 of the top 5 most remittance-reliant countries in the world are also in this region, including the top 3 for that as well, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tonga and Tajikistan. So this is a region where remittances are important both for large and small countries, and they all have different criteria. But as I said, it's not one single market. There are at least 6,000 individual corridors sending money into this region or within the region. And why is that important? Because if you are a money transfer provider, that means you have to understand the sender in their market, the receiver in their market, the regulatory environment in the send country and in the receive country. You need to develop marketing plans for each individual corridor and so on. All of these things involve a tremendous amount of effort and cost. And if you're dealing in a marketplace where there are differences in regulatory environments, for instance, between country A, country B and country C. You have to develop a solution for each one, and that just makes it more complex. So there was appeal by IFAD before the break for harmonisation, and I think just the fact of the number of corridors that we have here really demonstrates why that's so important. If we then look at the markets and who's operating in them, not surprisingly, on the sending side, the market tends to be dominated by money transfer companies, traditional global players. I think we're all familiar with the main brands, and we're going to hear from some of them in the next session, so I won't promote them anymore. Some of the regional operators. And then we have a lot of corridor operators who are only operating in one individual corridor. So we have a whole mix of levels and different requirements from each of those operators as to how they're going to operate their business to serve their customers as the best they can. These operators are sending money to receive countries where there are over 1 million locations in Asia Pacific alone. These locations have traditionally been bank branches or financial service networks, so there'll be bank branches, agents, microfinance locations. There'll also be increasingly mobile money operators as well. So we're starting to see a change, and I hope one day in the future we'll get to the point where we don't actually measure the number of outlets, because we won't need them, because everything will be going digital. But at the moment, it's vitally important. And so it's important to know where they are. And all of this information is contained at quite granular level in Remittances, so you'll be able to see this at country by country level. These operators are sending over 850 million transactions every year to Asia Pacific, and the costs that are being generated is about $18 billion to this region each year. Now, as we know, cash to cash everywhere is the most dominant form of remittances, and in this part of the world that's no different. In fact, there's more cash used here, probably a higher percentage than in some of the other regions out there. But other methods are starting to be seen, particularly account to account, and obviously some of the online and digital players are starting to make their presence felt. So, if we then go a bit lower level, let's talk about pricing. We heard this morning already, I think everybody's familiar with SDG 10.C at the 3% target. I think if you look at this chart here, there's quite a few parallel lines. So the top parallel big dashed line, that is actually the global average, 7.13%, down from around 10% in 2009. But still a long way to go if we're going to get to 3% by 2030. The small dotted line underneath is the average for Asia and the Pacific at 6.86%, so slightly below, but averages don't really tell the whole story. So then if you look at the bars, you can see the sub-regions here, and what's interesting is Central Asia is probably the only region in the world that is actually below the SDG target. Most of their money comes from Russia. There's virtually zero foreign exchange earning and very low fees. So interesting their experience. All of the other regions are well above the 3% target, although slightly down on what they were 3 years ago. But I think we need to look at ways to reduce remittances faster than they've been declining up to now. Now, one of the reasons I think many entities will talk about the problems that they're experiencing is around the regulatory environment. So again, within Remit Scope, there's a section on which regulations apply to each market, and then hopefully there's helpful links that will take you straight through to those regulations. So actually, for anybody looking to enter a market, you can get direct access to a lot of that useful information. And regulation covers more than just licensing, although licensing tends to be where most of the focus is. Who's allowed to operate in countries? And if you look at that table on the right, that's a sample of 42 countries that we extracted, and it shows the types of entities that are approved specifically in national regulations to be able to operate remittances. So obviously banks are the highest, but you can see some of the others there, with MNOs being, amongst that group anyway, only about a quarter of the countries in Asia Pacific allow MNOs to operate as remittance providers. So when we're looking at fintech and some solutions, even MNOs, which are some of the most simplest form of fintech, let's call it, are not permitted. So that's one of the challenges that we have. Licensing should also cover consumer protection. In this region, like many others, it's, let's call it embryonic. There needs to be a lot more work that needs to be done there. And then we've got AML, CFT regulations. We've already heard about that quite a lot today, so we need to be cognizant of what is actually said there. Supervision. I think one of the key challenges that many operators have is that it's expensive to set up a business and achieve regulation. There's nothing more frustrating than being regulated and find you're complying with the regulations and others aren't, and there's nothing done to supervise or impose or deal with that. So there is a real plea to make sure we have strong regulation. Taxation, it's not a word I think that anybody apart from a revenue collector enjoys, but I think in the remittances space, it's actually quite a damaging and dangerous trend that is out there at the moment, whether it's in the US, in Bahrain, or many other places. Quite often, people see large flows of money leaving their country and politicians decide that's a good source of revenue. Well, it's not a good source of revenue because all it will do is drive people to go outside of the formal system, and it's not going to achieve any of the aims. So I think we all need to make sure there's a strong, continued strong presence against that. De-risking, I'm not going to say very much, except because we've already talked about that today and there's other streams, except to say, you know, a couple of things on de-risking. One is, in Asia and the Pacific region, that its impact is variable depending on the countries. For the Pacific region, it's absolutely critical, as the World Bank already outlined today. For other regions, it's still very important. If you're receiving money from the Gulf states or other countries where there is de-risking problems, even if it's outside Asia Pacific, it still has a significant influence. And I think the key thing is we're now 6 years on from really the start of de-risking. And we've got to the point where there's an understanding of what the problems are. There are some suggestions about what the solutions might be, but I sense that we're still a long way from actually finding solutions that will work and finding ways to get banks to treat businesses as businesses and not businesses as some overall category where they don't know the specifics. So we really have to work hard on that now that we've got a better understanding. And one of the solutions will probably be fintechs. We don't know exactly what the solution's going to be, and indeed we don't know where we're going to go with fintechs. But one thing we can be pretty sure of is that the fintechs are not going to go away. So I think, you know, it's an area where we could really do with great harmonisation between regulators on how to approach this. And I think the example of Malaysia is a great one. So I'm just going to come to a close here on Remitscope and make a plea to all of you, really. Remitscope, just so you know, has really been compiled at this stage by masses of desk-based research, phone calls, market research and so on. But it's been deliberately designed to get a base of knowledge going. What we really want is for you to help us to help Remitscope grow. And one of the key things to do that is if you can actually check what's there. You'll see there's sections on money transfer companies, so you can provide information on your networks, your partnerships, your new products, your financial inclusion activities. Regulators can help us by providing details on their regulation. Development professionals provide details on their financial inclusion initiatives. If you can help us, we can then help you by publicising this, making it available to all of you to use as a tool to enter new markets and to, exactly as Pedro said, take the opportunity or identify the opportunities, save time and energy yourself, and then the most importantly, that will enable you to help the most important people, the families and the remitters, and to give them the remittance services that they deserve. Thank you.